Well, first of all, can I welcome everybody to this our conference and workshop on social isolation to social inclusion in Hertfordshire. My name is Steve Knighton. I'm the Programme Director for Mental Health Services at the Strategic Health Authority, and I'm going to be your chair for the day. Certainly from our perspective, the purpose of today is very much to give you the chance to listen to a glittering array of speakers this morning with a whole range of issues around day services, etc., day care. But it's much more important, I think, certainly when we come to this afternoon's workshop sessions, that we do hear your views and that there is opportunity for you to feedback on what you believe are the best services for Hertfordshire. I think it's very important, this, and if not an important day, and in some respects, very timely for two reasons. First and foremost, I'm sure many of you may well have seen, or if you haven't, you should, the Mental Health and Social Exclusion Report. And I think very much, I can just pick out some of the main points from this, which was very much about adults with mental health are one of the most excluded groups. And in terms of the disabilities, this group is often the group that has the lowest employment. It's certainly seen that social isolation is a very important risk factor in deteriorating mental health. And again, the document, I suppose I would call the deterioration circle, tells you how that cycle very much works. In terms of, if you like, how does it affect all of us? Well, some of the factors in here were such that severe mental illness, albeit rare, affects 1 in 200 of us, and in actual fact has a major impact on families, carers, etc., for those particular people who are involved. If I'm allowed to now at this stage put my own pitch in, as lead for the Investing in Your Mental Health review that's being undertaken across Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, for me, I have a very personal interest in today, and that's very much about listening to speakers and hearing people's views about how we would like to take what comes out of today is in terms of outcomes and takes that forward into the Investing in Your Mental Health review. I see this part of it as being an extremely important service element, and if you like, we would certainly not be doing a proper job if we didn't incorporate this within our strategies. Again, within the pack, there is some notes in there about how you can contact the Strategic Health Authority if you do want to make any comments from today or any other comments that you may have on investing in your mental health. It is going to be, as I'm sure you can see, a very tight programme. What I will try to do at the end of each speaker is allow for questions, but I hope because of timing you'll also allow me the lecturing way to try to contain the number of questions. I will have to maybe use sort of chairman's guillotine, but we'll try not to. If at the end of the session you still have some burning questions that haven't been addressed, could you please try and find the speakers during coffee break and lunch, and I've forewarned them you will be coming to talk to them, so please don't feel you'll miss that opportunity to get your questions. Jill is going to be our roving mic. Yes? So when it comes to question time, could I ask you please to raise your hand? Jill will come and try and find you. If you could tell us who your name is. If you are representing an organisation, could you let us know what the organisation is? And then if I could ask if you can be as clear as concise with your question to the speaker, and we will try to get through as many questions as we possibly can. I have said today is about listening to your views as well, and I hope that you have seen in the presentation pack, there is in actual fact a feedback form, very much about this morning's sessions and the presentations. Please feel free to use the form to fill in your comments, burning questions, because certainly we'd like to collate these at the end of the day as part of the outcome from today. Also, you'll find in the pack, as it were, the omnipresent post-its. Please, again, certainly for your workshops this afternoon, again, comments, thoughts, ideas, questions. If you don't feel they've been adequately addressed or you'd like to make your thoughts, please fill out the post-its. And in each of the workshops, there is a flip chart, so please use the flip chart to stick your post-its on, please, so that we do get a full and representative view from everybody on thoughts and views about today's sessions. In terms of the workshops, as you have been coming in, I think the registration sort of people have been trying to allocate you to a particular workshop. I think we're going to try to accommodate as much as we possibly can your wishes, but we will have to limit the numbers because of the size of the varying rooms. So could I ask at coffee break in the coffee area, there will be a list of who is in which of the workshops. So could I please go and ask that you check? I know Graham's looking at me, which the point was also to say, if you actually haven't registered, could you also please go and register and make sure that the people know that you're here, and then they can allocate you to a particular workshop. You will have noticed, no doubt, that there are cameras here. The cameras being provided by Serious Media Limited. They do intend to be as unintrusive as they possibly can. They will be as sensitive as they can. And no, this is not an attempt for us to develop our own "you have been framed" programme as a result of today. Certainly Serious Media have worked alongside local government, various voluntary organisations and charities, and have in actual fact looked through and worked on multimedia events representing all social and cultural issues. So they do have a lot of experience. Part of the reason for today is, I think it's true to say, we have been oversubscribed for the event. There are lots of people who would like to have come today and haven't been able to, and would really like to present the video or make the video available to those people who would have liked to have been here but won't be able to. The videos will be recording all of today's presentations, and I think they will be dipping in and out of the workshops this afternoon so that everybody basically gets a full flavour. Without further ado, can I introduce our first sort of speaker, Mr. Peter Bates from the National Development Team. Peter is sort of involved very much in practical training of staff around, as it were, social inclusion day services and day centres. And Peter was telling me that he was, in actual fact, or has been, one of the external advisors appointed at the initial point in working with the social exclusion unit. So Peter has a very good background in the area we're about to discuss. Peter, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be here, although I wasn't so convinced of that at 5 o'clock when the alarm went off this morning in order to get here. I guess some of you have had an early start as well, so let's get going. If you were to move to live in a completely different town, what would be the sorts of things that you would do in order to actually get a life together in that new place? Maybe you'd use some of these things. For many of us, it would be one or more, probably not all of these things, but for most of us, we would make connections through one or other of these sorts of areas of our lives. Work might be the reason that people had moved. Somebody in the household. You might do an evening class. You might take up a sports or exercise opportunity. Start going and using the torture chamber at the gym. Sorry, the fitness suite. You might have a particular interest in terms of arts or cultural activities. I don't just mean going to watch the ballet. It might be the local karaoke night at the pub at the end of the road. It could be all kinds of things. People have such a wide variety of interests. Some people, their place of real identity and belonging is to join a faith-based group. And some people volunteer and give their time to their local communities by signing up to volunteer in a local organisation. These are all places where people go to make new friends. There's also ordinary places as well, like sometimes people neighbour, and get to know the people who they live nearby. Although for many of us, our neighbours are not the closest people to us in our lives. Some of us travel to work, leave early in the morning, get back late in the evening. Our neighbours are doing similar things, living quite differently. So for many of us, it's these sorts of activities which form the basis, the fabric of the ways in which we as human beings connect with one another. I've not put shops down here. I've not put shops down because for most of us, we don't connect with people. We don't go shopping to make a friend. Although I understand the supermarkets where you can put a bottle of wine in the front rack. Particular evening, you heard this? Yeah, one or two people have. Asda, Bridge North, Thursday night, 7 o'clock. Definitely, but where else, I'm not sure. People make a note. Bottle of wine in the bit at the front where you put the bottles or the bunch of flowers or whatever means you're up for meeting people as you go around. But for most of us, We might go shopping with a friend, but we don't go shopping to make a friend, to make a new connection. These are the sorts of things that we do to make a new connection. Some or all of these things. These are the sorts of things that most people actually use to connect with others in their ordinary lives. They're the ordinary sorts of things we would do. So, what about the experience of people who've made extensive use of mental health services? And this is a page from that Social Exclusion Unit report. And just to explain this, they had people doing interviews, but not doing formal psychiatric assessments, which is why it says probable psychosis. The doctors helped them to think about reasonable questions, but they weren't making a formal diagnosis at this point. But these 5 or 6 things are all areas which most people would see as helping an individual to get on in life, to feel okay about their life, to be comfortable, and to have something which they would regard as being a good quality of life. And on every count, then people with mental health issues are generally excluded. They have less opportunity than others. I won't go through the detail of that, but I'm sure it's something you're familiar with. People with good qualifications, the social class thing is about employment standing. It's a tricky one, all these things, aren't they? They're very difficult, because after all, it's not about valuing a person for the kind of work that they do. But these are the things that, by and large, society values. And let's look at it in terms of relationships too. They were some of the practical things. I've got let's set this one aside. This is a quote about people with learning disabilities. But here we are. This is an exact quote from Howard Meltzer, who works for the Office for National Statistics. He uses the word patient. More than 1/3 of mental health patients say that they have no close contact to turn to for help. Patients are 4 times more likely than the average not to have one close friend. We know there are many people who are using mental health services who make some really important and supportive relationships in day services, in advocacy groups, in other settings. But the overall picture, in terms of the experience of mental distress, is that people are profoundly isolated. Not everybody, not in all circumstances, but the common picture is that people are isolated. And does it matter? Well, isolation increases the risk of a poor quality of life. Most of us, let's do a quick poll. Who finds that their social contacts, their friendship groups are one of the most important things in their lives? See, look round. Yeah, friendship is really important. We count our friends as being absolutely fundamental. Difficulties remain undetected. How often, with that nagging, persistent cough, has it been somebody in your life who has said, come on, get down to the doctors? Issues get resolved more quickly when we're well connected. People are actually safer if they're well connected. The biggest risk in terms of discrimination, abuse and so on is if you're isolated. And finally, isolation, there's a real correlation between social isolation and illness and death, and you'll probably know some of the figures around physical illness and its link up with mental ill health, maybe partly mediated through social isolation. So why are people so isolated? And 3 possible reasons. These are just my way of looking at this and making sense of it. And the first reason, if people are so isolated, people with mental health issues in general are so profoundly isolated, then one of the reasons that gets knocked around is because there's something wrong with the person. People are lacking in confidence, don't want to mix, don't feel comfortable out there in the wider world, don't have social skills, find it difficult to maintain relationships. Let's blame the person. Something wrong with the individual. Here's another theory, which is that the reason that people are so isolated is there's something wrong with the community. Well, there's truth in all these things, isn't there? Actually, the community is not a very welcoming place sometimes. Stigma, discrimination, you know perhaps some of the information about the way in which, for example, employers have a real problem in offering jobs to people with mental health issues. They're less likely to offer jobs to somebody with a mental health issue than any other kind of disability. And everybody who works around this area has got stories. Everybody who's experienced mental distress will have a story to tell about people who walk away, friendships that shut down when somebody experiences a mental health problem. Something wrong with the community. That's a possible hypothesis as to why people are so isolated. But here's a third model. That fitted, didn't it? The reason that people are so isolated is there's something wrong with the system. That actually the way that we organise things have led to people being isolated and segregated. I'm interested in that particular hypothesis because it offers the most hope. Because we can change at least parts of the system. We can do things differently. And if it is that over 200 years, we have responded to people's mental distress by segregating people away from mainstream society, and as a result of that, organisation after organisation in the wider community has responded by segregating people too. Talk to your local college about mental health and they say, oh yes, let's do a special class in the special annex. Because we've shown them that what you do is you respond to mental ill health by putting people in separate places. Something wrong with the system. Against that backcloth, government has been doing something in the last few years to promote inclusion rather than exclusion. Now, I have to say before that, I don't work for the government, so I'm allowed to say that in my view, the government is perfectly capable of doing two contradictory things at the same time. Two, maybe more than two. And I'm very conscious of the work which, in my view, promotes exclusion. We'll see in terms of the mental health bill. Look at the treatment of refugees and asylum seekers. Look at the processes that are called cleaning up the streets. Look at the increase in prison population. Gone up 30% in the last 10 years. Crime has gone down 5%, so that worked, didn't it? So, at one and the same time, government is increasing exclusion of some groups, school league tables leading to children being excluded from school if they don't fit. All sorts of ways. But at the same time, all kinds of initiatives which are combating exclusion. Disability Discrimination Act. I'm not going to go through these in detail. We have to write a report every year to the European Union to say what we're doing to combat exclusion. The care programme approach talks about employment, lifelong learning, people getting connected to their communities. The National Service Framework for Mental Health, Standard 1, tackles the issue of mental health promotion and challenging discrimination. The Social Exclusion Unit report has already been mentioned. The Modernisation Agency talks about equity and access, just different jargon for the social inclusion jargon. The Human Rights Act. Valuing people is the Learning Disability White Paper, and of course people with learning disabilities have equal right of access to mental health services. Welfare to work, trying to smooth that difficult path between benefits and employment, is about trying to promote inclusion. And the Special Educational Needs and Disability Act gives every child the right to go to their local school rather than be sent to a special school. So where do we go? We need to go for dreams. We need to go for people's ambitions. Absolutely fundamental in this process. We need to reconnect with what people want to do with their lives. We need planning systems that are not actually about mental health care planning. They're not just about care planning, but they're about life planning. We need to understand each other's dreams, what we want to do with our lives. Now, I've quoted Martin Luther King there, a guy with a dream that was unattainable. Well, we've not got there in the last 40 years, have we, in terms of equality? But it's been a dream which has motivated, has driven people, has been something which has been worth going for. And so we need to listen carefully. And so when people turn up at mental health services, it's about saying, what makes your life work? Not, what's the matter with you? Here's a typical picture. The inner segment, the inner ring of this circle, describes the people that Sue is connected with. And there are 5 people in her life, people that she would really miss, people who are key individuals in her life. And the outer ring counts places that she goes to. And so Sue goes to 2 places, and they happen to be both mental health places, and there are 5 really key people in her life. And they're all people she knows through the services. And there's nobody she's in touch with in relation to those other departments of life. And that sort of picture is a common picture for people who've used mental health services for a long time. And the goal seems to be to increase the number of places that people feel safe in, as they want to. Many people do have ambitions to work, to learn, to go to ordinary places, to pick up the threads of their life. And for people, again, a real ambition is to make connections with a wider community. So what can we do in services to make a difference? To begin to fill up that circle. There are projects all over the country, day services that are beginning to work with these things. You may have heard of a project called Mainstream in Liverpool. They run a day service, they have no building and no groups. Everything they do is about working with one person at a time, asking that person, what do you want to do? And then helping that person to connect with an ordinary activity. For example, an individual who wants to do some creative writing. Well, let's go and find the local writers' club and support the person to join it. Because actually, writing a mental health story on mental health paper with a mental health pen while sitting in a mental health day centre and sending it to the mental health writers group to have it published in a mental health publication and circulated amongst mental health users is not actually where inclusion is for all of us. There are writers out there down the street in ordinary communities. I visited a day centre once for older people with mental health issues. And they said, oh, you know, we really struggled about this, but we finally got going again, and we have bingo sessions sometimes. The workers didn't want to do it, but they found actually that people liked it. So they started playing bingo again. So I said, oh, that's great. Where do people play bingo around here? And they scratched their heads and thought about it and struggled and eventually remembered a sheltered housing complex that has bingo on a Tuesday afternoon once a month. And said, oh yeah, there's that sheltered housing complex. There was a Mecca bingo hall at the end of the road, which they hadn't noticed, because all they were thinking about was what was going on in services. It's as though we get a visual impairment and all we can see is the mental health places and not the community places. Many people do want to make connections. There's a service that I've been working with in Gateshead near Newcastle. And all their day services, mental health day services, voluntary sector, social services, health, are all moving towards a social inclusion model. And most of their staff will be supporting individuals who want to make those connections to move out into ordinary settings and get the support that they need in ordinary places alongside ordinary citizens. They're going to retain some small building-based provision, but the majority of the support will be out there. So, if we're thinking through that way, there are 3 ways in which we can actually deal with this and think about it. Some people take what I call the target model. And what they're doing is they're targeting symptoms. So they're saying our mental health service is about combating symptoms. What we're here for is to help people feel less depressed, be less troubled by their voices, be less thrown around in their life by fluctuations of mood. That's our job. And so it's all very well, this getting connected with jobs and education and faith-based groups and volunteering and all that kind of stuff. But actually, it's not what we're here for. It's not something that we're resourced to do. So maybe you need a job, but we're a mental health service. So we'll just look after your symptoms. I met somebody once who was so depressed that they were not eating and drinking very much, they were not getting clean, they were in serious health risk because of self-neglect. And a physiotherapist and an occupational therapist took them up to the golf course because this gentleman had lived to play golf before he'd had a stroke and then become depressed. And all the time they were on the golf course with him, helping him to stand up because of the stroke and swing a golf club, they were frightened that the board members from the trust would spot them and tell them off for not being at work. That gentleman got his life back because he'd lived to play golf. Maybe he couldn't drive 250 yards like he could before, but he could sit in the 19th with his mates. Yeah? So for some people, it's not that it's about just dealing with symptoms. People need a life too. Here's a second approach, which is, oh yes, it's all very well, social inclusion is wonderful stuff, but we're into the business of steps. So what happens is you get sick, you then get well, and then you get back. So yes, of course, we want to help you maintain your connections, to get connected up with life. We'll do all that later, when you're stable. I'm trying to wonder whether I've been stable in my life. As though life happens later on. And of course, later on never comes, does it? Because there's a new crisis coming up and more people coming through the door, and we'll get to it eventually. So what we're saying to people is, oh, not yet, but I want to maintain contact. I want to stay in touch with my friends. I want to find a way of maintaining on a part-time basis the work that I had, despite the fact I'm in crisis. I heard a story, it might be one of those urban myths, but I heard tell of somebody who was on an acute ward, and eventually the staff noticed that he kept slipping off about 7:30 in the morning and coming back about 5:30. Finally somebody asked him, and he was sneaking off to work but didn't like to say. Because they'd have said, talked to somebody a while ago who worked in the space between the mental health service and employers, and she said, I'm sorry to say it, she said, when it comes to giving people a chance, employers are much more likely to give people a chance than people who work in mental health services. Small wonder that the social exclusion unit says that mental health services have been suppressing people's ambitions. Here's a third model, the balance. Symptoms and citizenship. Let's keep life going. Let's focus on helping communities to become welcoming and accepting. Half the job is to support the person. The other half of the job is not to fix the person. The person's fine. Half the job is to fix the community. The community needs to get healed from its negative, discriminating, unwelcoming problem. The community's got a mental health problem. We need to help the community to become more welcoming. You might get the impression that I support the balance model and would encourage people to run not just job retention opportunities into acute wards and across the whole mental health services. Let's go to life retention, shall we? Finally, let's sort out the different ways in which we can operate. Last but one slide. Here's a way of thinking about mental health services. This is listed as disability, mental health in this case. There are red places. These are mental health buildings, and the people you meet are mental health people. That could be a place run by the trust, run by social services. It could be something that's user-led, user-run. It's still a red place. It might be empowering, it might be wonderful, but in inclusion terms only. Might be doing some great work with individuals, but in inclusion terms, it's a sanctuary or a ghetto. It's a segregated place. Amber. These ordinary places, but the people you meet are still users. Oh yes, we go to the ordinary college, but the college is offering segregated classes because we know that people with mental health problems learn computing differently, don't they? and we have to teach different kind of geography to people with mental health issues. We do segregated classes sometimes. Finally, green is where individuals get the support they need to mix with people without acknowledged mental health issues. Now, the problem is that we've spent all our money on red stuff. We've built all our skills for working in red places. We have a habitual way of thinking, which is to focus on red. You know, I met 4 people yesterday who were all interested in taking up some kind of physical activity. Oh, let's do a group. Why do we think that way? They live in 4 different parts of town. Why don't we find their 4 local running clubs, leisure activities, gyms, swimming baths, and introduce people to their local community? It's simple as that. There's some brochures on the side if you're interested in training materials around this stuff. I spend my life moving around amongst services where people are interested in building their green skills, learning more about how to support individuals, one person at a time, to achieve their own ambitions. And those ambitions are not too great. They're, as Captain Kirk had it, to boldly go where everyone else has been before. Thank you very much.